Good evening, everyone. It's George from Ireland here. I'm commenting about the extraordinary claim made by the Ukrainian government just a couple of days ago, on the 26th of November. So, President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed that his intelligence service had uncovered a conspiracy by certain Russians to overthrow his government. Notably, he didn't say that the Russian government was in any way involved in this. So, sometimes things are conspicuous by their absence. Now, there's been a major build-up of Russian forces on Ukraine's frontier for a couple of weeks now. Now, the Ukrainian government is obviously deeply anxious about this and said there may well be an invasion of Ukraine in the next few weeks. Other NATO countries, well, sorry, not that Ukraine's a NATO country, NATO countries are a bit more skeptical of this. Various analysts say that Russia wouldn't go that far because there'd be major repercussions for them. Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, has illegally occupied Crimea, which is recognized as Ukrainian by virtually every country on earth, obviously illegally occupied Luhansk and Donbass. Now, the Russian government shouts on the rooftops that it's taken Crimea and says that it's legally integrated Crimea into the Russian Federation and is granted citizenship to all Crimeans, whether they want it or not, and they're represented in the Russian parliament. But Luhansk and Donetsk have set up, the People's Republic has been set up there. That's in eastern Ukraine, immediately adjacent to Russia. Now, Russia notably hasn't recognized Donbass and Luhansk as independent countries or indeed part of the Russian Federation. But driving around Russia, you will see occasionally cars with a license plate from the Donbass People's Republic or the Luhansk People's Republic. So the Russian army is fighting in Donbass and Luhansk alongside the pro-Moscow rebels. The pro-Moscow rebels are really just an unofficial part of the Russian army. Certainly their equipment is provided by the Russian army, and on and on. So whereas Crimea, Russia does formally claim for itself. But Anyway, the Ukrainian army took a drubbing in 2014, which is why Ukraine has lost, well, at least 10% of its territory, and they've been fighting not too intensely for a few years to get it back. But the Ukrainian army has expanded very considerably over the last 7 years, has had a lot of shipments of fairly sophisticated NATO weaponry. Will there be a conflict, a full-scale one? I don't think so, but it might ramp up. Then again, in 2014, there was a consensus among experts that no, Russia wouldn't go that far. They wouldn't actually invade Crimea and seize that portion of Ukraine for themselves. Well, it was very easy for them to do because the Russian Black Sea Fleet was already there. Now, Crimea was part of Russia for a couple of centuries, the Russian Empire, so was Ukraine, so were loads of places. But then when in the Soviet era, there was the Russian Soviet Socialist Federative Republic as part of the USSR, and Crimea was part of that. Then in 1955, by a stroke of a pen, Nikita Khrushchev, he transferred the peninsula from Russia to Ukraine. Now that seemed to make almost no difference because these were two union republics of the USSR, and most people in Crimea were ethnically Russian. The rest were mostly Russophone. There's an indigenous ethnic minority there, Tatar people, Muslims with their own Tatar language, but they can all speak fluent Russian too. It's only in 1991, at the dissolution of the Soviet Union, this appeared to be impactful. I know someone from Crimea, and he views himself as Russian through and through, even actually ethnically he's only half. I'm very glad when it went back to Russia, even though legally it's still part of Ukraine. So Ukraine bent over backwards to accommodate the Russians with regard to Crimea, and relations very cordial in the 90s, and even in the early noughties. So saying, yeah, fine, you can keep your Black Sea Fleet there, and all the rest of it, and Russian would be a co-official language of the whole of Ukraine, but the primary language of Crimea. The Tatars also had their collective individuality recognized there. But the conflict erupted in early 2014, partly because of the overthrow of Yanukovych, who was this pro-Moscow president of Ukraine. It may well have been a big mistake for Russia to back this, because previously the pro-Russian segment of the Ukrainian population was quite big, was up to 40%. But now that Ukraine has lost control of Crimea, Donbass and Luhansk, the pro-Russian segment of Ukraine is perhaps 20% of the population, because the most overwhelmingly pro-Russian areas, they're effectively ruled by Russia these days. Anyway, so now President Zelensky, he didn't publicize many particulars of this alleged conspiracy, but he said that Russian citizens were planning to execute their putsch on the night of December the 1st, 2nd this year. So anyway, the Kremlin has riposted, of course, saying it's completely absurd, which they almost always say. That's usually know that they are guilty when they say this sort of thing. Now, its riposte is in fact that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is the one that is ramping up tensions and said that their behavior is threatening to Russia, and they're the real provocateurs because of naval exercises in the Black Sea. But I mean, that's partly because of Russia illegally occupying Crimea, which is more aggressive. There are obviously NATO countries in the Black Sea, such as Romania, Turkey, and Bulgaria. So of the 6 Black Sea countries, 3 of them are NATO member states. One of them, the other 2, Ukraine and Georgia, are very close to NATO, and they obviously feel menaced by Russia, and some of Georgia, South Ossetia, has also been under illegal Russian occupation for about 20 years. And Moscow also complained that NATO warplanes have been flying close to Russian airspace, which I don't doubt is true. The Russians very often violate other countries' airspace, their military aircraft. So what they'll do is they'll violate your airspace by an inch, and a bit more, and a bit more, and a bit more, and see and test your resolve. At what point will you respond? And when you do, they'll say, no, it's a lie, we never did anything. Or you were behaving aggressively. So it's absolute shamelessness, just bare-faced lying from the Kremlin again and again and again. And this was shown classically with the invasion of Crimea, this unprovoked act of aggression against a friendly country, Ukraine, which even had Russian as one of its co-official languages, when the Russian government lied and lied and lied, denying that its soldiers had invaded Ukraine, and then boasting with great fanfare that they had taken over Crimea. And I've even seen a map in a Russian classroom wall from 2014 has got one colour for Russia, another colour for Ukraine, and it's got the Crimea as Ukraine's colour, which it was. And that's issued by the Russian government. They've mapped maps, then they shaded it in completely unconvincingly subsequently. So now, I'm not saying I believe this plot. It wouldn't surprise me, but Zelensky might lie like anybody else, particularly like a politician, especially as his ratings are going down and down. They're consistently dropping, partly because the coronavirus situation is bad. This is the poorest country in Europe. Yes, I mean poorer than Moldova. So the economy is stagnant. They can't afford coronavirus vaccines, really. They've been given lots of free ones by the European Union in particular. He's not managed to get rid of corruption despite endless pledges to do so. So perhaps he's trying to boost his flagging popularity by being a bit bellicose like this. So the Secretary General of NATO is Jens Stoltenberg, and he said that NATO will support Ukraine through thick and thin, and indeed if Russia fully invades Ukraine, then this will have grave consequences for Russia. Notably, he didn't say that a single NATO troop would serve on their side. I mean, if I was Biden, I would move troops in there, especially near Luhansk, Donbass, so the Russians can't advance. If they open fire, they will be killing Americans, and also near Crimea, so they can't invade from there. I mean, anywhere else like Odessa, Luhansk, Berdyansk, and Mariupol, those ports in the Sea of Azov. You could also have a NATO flotilla to escort Ukrainian ships through the Kerch Strait, where Russia's illegally built a bridge. But the thing is, that's a confrontation which could actually lead to a conflagration. I don't want the Third World War over this. So partly Putin is banking on NATO backing down, which has largely worked for him because Crimea has got a close place to him, or is close to his heart, is really dear to them, is fairly unimportant for NATO countries. Hello there, Colleen. So President Zelensky, he was inaugurated in May 2019, and the Russians thought he might be interlocuteur valable because he comes from eastern Ukraine. Russian is his mother tongue. Moreover, he's Jewish, which is pertinent because he might be less attracted to Ukrainian nationalism than some, because at the extreme end of Ukrainian nationalism, there's some anti-Semitism, and that's true of almost any European nationalism. So I'm not suggesting that most Ukrainian nationalists are anti-Semitic in the least. Now, he occasionally speaks Russian in public, which a lot of Ukrainians will now refuse to do because they're so miffed that their country has been suffering this illegal invasion and occupation by Russia. If you want to declare war, you could declare war, then you'd be fighting legally. But if you're fighting illegally, you're a what? You're a terrorist, right? I mean, terrorist is what Putin would call a journalist. So when they are actually fighting illegally, not wearing uniform, not certainly an army uniform, not fighting very recognised army, that is illegal. Using premeditated violence for the furtherance of national, political, religious, or other ideological goals, that is terrorism according to the Terrorism Act in the United Kingdom. And they say it doesn't matter where in the world this is occurring. Anyway, so Zelensky, he was a comedian before he went into politics, which is why people thought surely he couldn't win. And Petro Poroshenko, the incumbent whom he defeated in 2019, said, being president is no joke, you can't laugh this off. But anyway, he defeated Poroshenko, despite having broadly the same policy on the conflict. But when Zelensky was a comedian, he was almost as popular in Russia as he was in Ukraine. He did his shows in Russia sometimes, so he can do his shows in both languages. He doesn't speak English that well. So Moscow has now completely dropped the idea that they can make a peace deal with him. Zelensky, he's met Putin a few times since he became president, and Zelensky has also publicly promised to recover every last inch of lost territory, and that includes Crimea for him. So, but how is he going to make peace, one pledge, and recover the lost territory? I mean, it just doesn't add up, does it? So it's not like Ukraine can defeat Russia, and it needs a lot of European support. The worry for Ukraine is that eventually wane, they'll eventually lose that, especially over Nord Stream 2, this new pipeline under the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany, and then the Russians would have the EU over a barrel. Because if the EU is uppity, then Russia can switch off the heating in the EU in midwinter. And also the $1 billion in transit fees that the Ukrainians get from a Russian gas pipeline crossing their territory, they're not going to get. Now, $1 billion is huge to a country as poor as Ukraine. Sorry, I hope doesn't come across as demeaning. It's not intended to. Anyway, so Russia has done everything it can to signal that they regard Crimea as part of their sovereign territory. They've openly said so. It's in their constitution. It's a crime in Russia to say that Crimea is not part of the Russian territory, and their constitution forbids them from ever giving away a millimetre of their national territory. It's a crime to have a political party suggesting that, or any secessionist movement, the equivalent of the SDLP or SNP or Plaid Cymru, is criminalised in Russia. There's no freedom of association and there's no freedom of expression. So all Crimeans have been granted Russian citizenship and so on. Okay, so Zelensky said that the Ukrainian intelligence service, the SBU, has got audio recordings of these conspirators. Notably, he didn't actually reveal those. He hasn't publicized those. He claims this Ukrainian billionaire, Rinat Akhmetov, might be involved. Sorry, the recording said that. However, President Zelensky says he disbelieves this claim. So Akhmetov made an awful lot of money in oil and gas, and he now has TV stations, newspapers, and so on. And they have been savaging Zelensky in the past few weeks. So Zelensky also said that he would oligarchize his country, but this hasn't really worked, and the courts have been quite obstinate and obstructive. Anyway, that's my penny's worth about what's happening in Ukraine. So please follow me. Please donate on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. So what else might you want to know? So book online lessons with me in elocution, history, politics, religious studies, debating, things like that, English language, English as a foreign language. Someone's asking will I travel to India in future. Well, I haven't been for absolutely years. I might do. I was thinking about it again, but it's just so polluted these days. All right, toodaloo, goodbye.